Okay, we're going to get started. My name is Nicole, and we are going to do the zero tolerance policy debate. And our members are Crystal Manrique, and the summarizer. The illustrator is Ebony Willis, and the researcher is Katie Thompson. Our fielder is Amanda Crabb, and we will be debating whether the primary use of the zero tolerance policy in schools is ethical. For a brief overview, the zero tolerance policy is a strict enforcement of regulations and bans against undesirable behaviors of possessions of certain items. Most school districts in the United States have a zero tolerance policy in effect. The policy became a law when Congress passed the Drug-Free Schools and Campuses Act of 1989. The act banned the unlawful use or possession or distribution of drugs and alcohol by any students or employee on school grounds or any college campus. It also required any educational agencies or institutions of any higher learning to establish any disciplinary sanctions or for violations or risk of losing any federal aid. As a result, most schools and colleges immediately put this zero tolerance policy in effect to safeguard any federal funding that they may receive. Supporters of the zero tolerance policies contend that they can promote any safety and well-being of school children, and they want to send a powerful message of deterrence. The critics of zero tolerance policies believe that inflexible discipline policies usually produce harmful results for children. Most school administrators have failed to use any common sense in applying the zero tolerance policy, mostly resulting in suspending or expelling children for bringing school items such as aspirin or any like plastic knives to school. The widespread perception of any increase in school violence promoted schools to respond with strict disciplinary sanctions. The GFSA, also known as the Gun-Free Schools Act law, set up a safe school environment where all students will have the ability to attend a gun-free school zone through this implementation of the zero tolerance policy that would expel any offenders. We are going to move on to Crystal. She is going to begin the debate by starting off talking about claim number 1.
Thank you, Nicole. I will be playing the role of the summarizer for the pro side of the zero tolerance policy. My first claim is that zero tolerance policy is fast-acting and sends a clear and consistent message that certain behaviors are not acceptable. Code 2.09 states that behavior analysts have the obligation to advocate for and educate the client about specific scientifically supported most effective treatment procedures. Zero tolerance does that. Since its implementation, school crime and violence has declined in the past 5 years, and the risk of school shootings is very low. One of our core ethical principles is do no harm. Using zero tolerance enforces the safety and control of students. By doing so, we prevent the student from hurting themselves or other students, especially in the areas regarding weapons and guns. Zero tolerance maintains a safe environment. These policies respond swiftly and concisely to curb the actions they are controlling. These policies, when communicated and enforced evenly to the students, will show that discipline will be predictable and instant. Schools must also enforce these policies to make sure that they are in accordance with the law and not risk legal liability in the case of the event, the zero tolerance policy would have stopped. In this visual, you could see that school violence has declined over 20 years. Serious violent crimes and assaults against students ages 12 to 18 fell by about 75% since reaching a peak in 1993. School violence reached a 20-year low in 2010 before edging in about 2011. Now for the counterclaim, Katie.
So I'm Katie. I will be doing counterclaim number 1. The zero tolerance policies is ineffective in the long run and also has a many number of negative consequences. According to the APA, Zero Tolerance Task Force, the rate of school violence has actually been stable from the 1980s until now. And also there's a negative relationship between the use of school suspension and expulsions with the school-wide academic achievement, even when we're controlling for the socioeconomic status. In the long term, school suspension and expulsion are moderately associated with a higher likelihood of school dropout and failure to graduate on time. So concern has been raised in the literature that zero tolerance policies may create, enhance, or accelerate the negative mental health outcomes by creating increases in student alienation, anxiety, rejection, and the breaking of healthy adult bonds. So, in a study done in Ohio from 2010 to 2011, indicated that learners with emotional disorders had 7.2 times the increased possibilities of getting a suspension when compared to those without a disability. So some core principles that I've come up with for this counterclaim is to do no harm. So if we continue to use zero tolerance policies after we know that it causes all of these negative side effects in our students, such as anxiety and rejection, then we are doing harm to our students if we continue to use these policies. Another core principle is being just. So when you think about for the parents that are have students in have their students go to school and would not, or especially parents would not want their student, especially a child with a disability, to experience all these negative consequences. So we should be mindful of how the parents also feel about these consequences. And then a compliance code 4.08 and considerations regarding punishment procedures. And behavior analysts must evaluate the effectiveness of aversive procedures in timely manner. And modify the behavior change program if it's ineffective. So yeah. So let me. Okay, so go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you. Crystal's going to proceed with claim number 2.
Zero tolerance policy removes major offenders from the school and informs parents and students of inappropriate conduct. It ensures that learning environments are safe, secure, and orderly so that teachers can teach and children can learn effectively. According to an article by Northside Independent School District in San Antonio, Texas, they have a zero tolerance policy when it comes to bullying. This type of behavior is not permitted or tolerated at any level of schooling that the district provides. According to the website and the documented policy, the zero tolerance approach is not accepting bullying as a behavior and helps to keep students safe and sets up a map for campus administrators and teachers to follow the allowed and effective implementations. There are various avenues for the administrators, teachers, and parents to go through to find out what policy best fits the issue. There are trainings, campus presentations, online materials, and general practice teachings that promote the zero tolerance policy to protect students. Northside also provides a parent website to help parents or research what might impact their child and other students. The district provides various avenues of research and implementations of the zero tolerance policy to promote the best course of action for students. Communication with students and their families is incredibly important as well. Zero tolerance informs everyone what is expected and takes care of a problem immediately. Another school using zero tolerance is W.L. Valentine Elementary School, which teams up with parents and teachers in order to eliminate constraints and also explains what has occurred. So administrative representatives would generally follow one or more of the following procedures. They can discuss the incident and counsel a student. They can detain a student during the school day. They can inform a parent of the nature of the problem, seek parental input, and communicate any consequence applied due to the misbehavior. They can conference with parents, and students are sometimes included depending on the conference. So due to the fast action of school to eliminate distractions and threats, teachers are able to continue teaching and students are safer. According to the National Center of Educational Statistics, students' perception that students' perceptions of being in danger in school has decreased, and the percentage of students who are reported to be afraid of attack or harm in school has also decreased from 12 to 13%. If you can take a look at the visual, the total victimization from 1992 to 2016 has decreased both at school and away from school. And so looking at it from an ethical standpoint, Compliance Code 4.07b, environmental conditions that interfere with implementation, states that if environmental conditions hinder implementation of a behavioral change program, behavior analysts seek to eliminate the environmental constraints or identify in writing the obstacles to do so. Therefore, removing major offenders is eliminating the environmental constraint. Ebony?
Hi, I'm Ebony. I'm going to do counterclaim number 2. Educators and administrators are more likely to use the zero tolerance policy with learners in the special education community when classroom management practices are ineffective. We see that emerging professional opinion and qualitative research findings suggest that there's a disproportionate discipline of students of color, and it may be due to the lack of teacher preparation in classroom management and in cultural competence. So for this purposes, we define culture as their social group. When we're looking at regards to students with disabilities, there's a lot less data available, but it shows that students with disabilities, especially those with like emotional and behavioral disorders, they appear to be suspended and expelled at rates that are disproportionate to their representation in the population. So we don't have sufficient data available to like draw any conclusions yet, but we know that our counterclaim is going to suggest that it's due to the lack of teacher preparation in classroom. We think that it's just the quick and easiest solution for teachers and administrators. Therefore, with it lacks any regard for Compliance Code 4.09 with the least restrictive environment, as well as Compliance Code 4.03, as they're not really looking at individualized behavior change programs and the core principle of benefiting others, as it's just a quick and easy solution for teachers. So we propose to replace like alternative and increasing training for teachers in the classroom, behavior management and cultural sensitivity pedagogy. We also look at increasing training for teachers, administrators, and other professionals in the classroom environment, and helping address that issues to sensitivity with different races and cultural groups, and implement preventative measures that can improve school climate and improve the sense of school community and belongingness.
Claim 3, zero tolerance helps reduce a potential bias by basing disciplinary consequences off of the action rather than the student's demographics or disciplinary background. In a study that Moran did in 2018, the implementation of zero tolerance in schools helped diminish favoritism between students and educators. Not only does this mean we're being just to all students, an ethical principle we abide by, but it also helps prevent a code violation of Code 1.06, multiple relationship and conflicts of interest, which states that multiple relationship cause potentially harmful effects. Katie?
So I will be doing counterclaim to claim 3. Although zero tolerance policies were intended to be a deterrent for all offenders, the research actually shows that African Americans and minorities in general have been suspended and incarcerated at a higher rate than their white counterparts for over 3 decades. There's an overrepresentation in suspension and expulsion. Has been found consistently for African American students, and research supports the disproportionate discipline of students of color may be due to a lack of teacher preparation and classroom management, a lack of training in culturally competent practices, or racial stereotypes. Although there are fewer data available, students with disabilities, especially those with emotional and behavioral disorders, appear to have been suspended or expelled at rates that are disproportionate to their representation in their population. Compliance Code 4.03, it can be applied to this counterpoint because zero tolerance policies do not offer individualized plans for students as our BACB ethical codes outline that we should be doing. Also, Compliance Code 4.07, the environmental conditions interfere with the implementation. By taking the student out of the school environments, one could be preventing the proper implementation of a behavior program. And also, according to Dignity, every student should have the right to an education, even if the student has violated school policy, and they should have a say in their education.
Thank you. Crystal is going to proceed with claim number 4.
Implementing a zero tolerance policy in schools help prepare students for the real world, where there doesn't matter why they broke a rule. It just matters that they did, and then there's consequences for their actions. So again, according to Moran 2018, zero tolerance policies can ensure students follow the rules in school rounds, which will later help make them into outstanding citizens of society. Zero tolerance helps students realize the clear and concise nature of laws, what is considered lawful or unlawful. The National School Safety and Security Services stated that without zero tolerance policies, teachers will continue to give students breaks each time they misbehave without having a consequence for their actions. Individuals do not get breaks after breaks if they break a law. The law is not based off of favoritism and punishes everyone according to their crime. Therefore, giving breaks to students who repeatedly break the law is unrealistic.
Thank you, Crystal. Ebony, if you can proceed with counterclaim number 4.
Sure. So for counterclaim number 4, it's just that zero tolerance policies lack common sense, and they teach students that context doesn't matter. It does not matter what the offense, the punishment, the interventions are more cookie cutter, and they often do not fit the crime. And for an example would be an elementary school student who brought a plastic knife to school to cut her apple was suspended from school. It just doesn't make sense. So instead, what we would need to do is to replace one-size-fits-all disciplinary strategies with graduated systems of discipline where consequences are geared to the seriousness of the infraction. We need to seek to reconnect with alienated youth and reestablish the school bond for students and at-risk discipline problems or violence. And then, of course, use the threat assessment procedures to identify the level of threat posed by the students and make sure, again, that the consequence fit. Develop a planned continuum of effective alternatives for those students whose behavior threatens the discipline or safety of the school. Legislation should also clarify that schools are encouraged to provide just a vast array of different alternatives besides just suspension. There's in-school suspension and other disciplinary actions.
Thank you, everybody. Amanda, our fielder, will provide us with follow-up questions.
Hi guys, I'm Amanda, and I have 4 scenarios and questions that follow up in regards to the claim and counterclaims regarding zero tolerance policies. So our first scenario is that 3 13-year-old boys at a middle school in Colorado were fascinated by a 2.5-inch long laser pointer, and one of them had purchased it and brought it to school from a local store. School officials saw that this laser pointer was a dangerous weapon and categorized it as such and suspended all 3 boys for a year. One of the students who was suspended now attends a school that his mother calls a jail school with students who actually brought real weapons such as knives or guns to their schools. So the question being, in the world we live in today with many school shootings and acts of violence occurring, do you feel that schools could reduce these instances more with positive behavior supports or a zero tolerance policy? And how do you tell the difference between the actual threat or not in situations like the one I just mentioned?
From a pro zero tolerance side, I would have to say that zero tolerance sends a clear and consistent message that certain behaviors are not acceptable. As seen in the visuals above, school violence has decreased, school shootings have also decreased. Therefore, zero tolerance is effective. The rules of what is acceptable and not acceptable is mentioned to the students through a handbook at the beginning of each year. Therefore, if a student does not comply with the rules, there will be consequences. Whether it is a threat or not, it is against the rules and it should have a consequence.
From a positive behavior support side, a positive behavior support system is designed to be able to carefully monitor a large amount of students because of its 3-tiered organization. So it would actually be easier to identify the students that might be a potential threat to their peers. And the positive behavior support system could catch instances of dangerous behavior before it escalates into a critical situation.
Good points. So our next scenario is that an 8th grade female student became upset with another general education peer in a general education classroom. She threw a clipboard at him and it hit his head and cut it open. Her statement to the administrators when questioned was that she meant to throw it and hit him in the chest instead. The general education student went to the nurse to be checked for a concussion. This 8th grade student has been suspended for 1.5 days in school suspension and had recently been evaluated and met the expectations of a student with an emotional disability in August of this year. Last school year, when she was unidentified as having an emotional disability, she had 7 suspensions in school and out of school in the last month and a half of the school year. So in her current IEP, she has a goal about physical aggression, and she received a more severe punishment for much smaller aggressions than this one in the past. So my question is, how would the student be impacted if zero tolerance were the outcome of this scenario? given that it's not used in this school at the time? And how would her educational experience change if PBIS were used instead?
So from a pro zero tolerance side, the student would be expelled. The student should be considered a major offender for opening her peers' head. She would be a distraction in the learning environment and compromise the safety of her peers. Students such as these need to be removed in order to keep all other students safe and teach the students that her aggressive behavior has a huge consequence.
Okay, so being against the zero tolerance policy, of course, you know, the student being expelled is just a quick and easy solution for the administrator. If the positive behavior intervention supports were put in place instead, then the behavior intervention plan would indicate any antecedents and environmental conditions that we could target first to help reduce those number of types of occurrences, as she's had so many before in the past. So an individualized behavior change program would hopefully target her emotional disability as well as the physical aggression. And I think that right now it just lacks a clear, there's a clear lack of like preparedness on behalf of the teacher and the administrator.
Great. And so our next scenario goes to Crystal and Katie, and this scenario is about an African-American male student. He is a 115-pound football-playing freshman, pretty soft-spoken student, mostly keeps to himself. However, he had created this list, which he had titled the hit list, of kids that he wanted to tackle on the football field. And when it was brought and found by administrators, this is what led to his expulsion. So does having the zero tolerance policy help eliminate the elevated numbers of minorities being expelled from schools?
So for the pro zero tolerance side, I'd have to say that eliminating the elevated numbers of minorities is irrelevant. The point here is that there will be major consequences for anyone who would do this, no matter what race or gender or socioeconomic background they have. If there are more students in a specific gender or a certain ethnicity or certain etc. That are engaging in dangerous behaviors, then of course, like that group of individuals will have an elevated number. The goal is that after these individuals are punished, they will not engage in the behavior again.
From a standpoint that's against the zero tolerance policies, there's actually a visual that we have. Ebony, if you can pull it up. It is the racial gap widens for suspension graphic. This visual demonstrates that that it's the African American students that are more likely to be that are suspended at a much higher rate than their peers of all other ethnicities. So as zero tolerance policies continue to stay put in place, these numbers are not likely to decrease, and actually they continue to increase as well.
Great, thank you. So our last scenario is that there was a 15-year-old boy with an IEP who had Benadryl in his pocket at school. He was playing around with his friends in a physical way, like boys horse around, and there was cause for school officials to pat him down after they broke up the altercation. When they did this, they found the Benadryl in his pocket, and there is a record that is noted on the school nurse records that he is able to take this medicine, Benadryl, due to his seasonal allergies, and that the only reason this medication was in his pocket was because he forgot to take it before school. The school called for a manifestation meeting and pending his expulsion, and there happened to be an individual in the front office as they were waiting, who was an advocate for children with special needs. And she saw this family needed help, so she offered her services. After she found out that the school had made many errors in following his IEP, behavior plan, and the discipline policy, which resulted in the school finally backing down in their threat to expel this student. Had the advocate not been there to volunteer time, he probably would have been expelled in that situation. So do you feel that only students with an IEP are entitled to getting a manifestation meeting? And should the general education students be able to have the same right?
For the pro zero tolerance side, although students should have the same consequence to the same actions in order to be fair. Students with disabilities, in this case IEPs, should be the only ones allowed to have manifestation meetings to help compensate for the difference in development.
And taking a look against the zero tolerance policy, all students should have this same rights. So it goes back to looking at each situation individually. The manifestation meeting should be provided in all decision instances where we're looking at suspension or some type of punishment being involved. And we need to replace that one-size-fits-all disciplinary strategy. And in this case, for this child, thank goodness, it basically began with a threat assessment.
All right, we appreciate everybody watching our debate on the zero tolerance policy. We do just want to mention that those representing both sides of the zero tolerance policy were neither for or against the sides that they were debating. Again, thank you so much for watching, and everybody have a good night.